Here's the best sales pitch I have ever heard. It comes from today's guest, Danny Fontaine. Now, the year was 1979, and it was this massive company called British Rail. British Rail ran all the trains in the United Kingdom, and whoa, did they have a bad reputation. The trains were delayed, customer service was terrible, everything was always dirty. Now, British Rail made some changes and decided it was time to tell everyone about them. It was time to launch an ad campaign, and this is where today's story starts. Enter Peter Marsh. Now, for 2 decades, the company he was a part of, ABM, it was a top advertising agency in the UK. But this was way before all that. He was brand new, and he had won the chance to pitch British Rail. And well, I'll let Danny tell it from here.
So the day of the pitch arrives, and the British Rail guys, they approach the receptionist, and they're saying, "Excuse me, we're here to see Peter Marsh." She waves them away to a waiting area with a hand without saying anything. And they get to this waiting area, and there's dirty coffee cups, and there's old newspapers from 2 weeks ago, and there's piles of stinking cigarette ends in ashtrays. And some more time goes by, and they get up, they're like, "Okay, you've missed an opportunity in a lifetime, ABM." They put their bowler hats on, and they grab their briefcases, and they storm towards the exit. And at that very moment, Peter Marsh bursts into the room, and he says, "Gentlemen, you have just experienced what your customers go through every single day."
It won't surprise you to learn that Peter Marsh's company, that's ABM, well, it got the deal. And I'm sure you know why, right? In this beautifully crafted pitch, he told a whole story. He signaled that he understood the problem, and he evoked in his client the emotion that engendered connection. You know, sales is a craft. It is also an art, and that is what we're going to talk about today. From LinkedIn News, I'm Jessi Hempel, and this is Hello Monday. It's our show about the changing nature of work and how that work is changing all of us. And selling, whether it be the enterprise software that you sell to a consulting firm or that new bedtime that you sell your 7-year-old on, well, it's one of the most important things that we have to learn to do if we want to be successful in our careers or really anywhere else. And so today we are going to go real deep on what makes a good pitch. Our guest is Danny Fontaine. He leads an experiential selling team at IBM. He's closed millions of dollars in deals, and he hosts a podcast in the UK on selling. His new book is called Pitch: How to Captivate and Convince Any Audience on the Planet. And I'm just going to say that I wouldn't naturally be drawn to someone who had all of this in his bio. You know, I came into this conversation with some preconceived notions about the personalities of good salespeople. I'm not proud of it, but I'll tell you this, I was really wrong. Here's Danny Fontaine. It's easier to confine the idea of a pitch to the realm of sales than to step back and realize how many times a day, in order to be effective at whatever we want to do, from getting this podcast aired more frequently to getting my children to brush their teeth, we need to persuade people. We need to bring them into our stories. You know, so often when we're talking to somebody, we're so busy being in the process of saying the thing that we're saying or thinking the thing that we're thinking that we can't create the space to listen to them and meet them where they are. And it feels to me like all a good pitch is it's a breakthrough in communication between the speaker and the spoken to so that they actually hear each other.
What we must do is find a way to create an emotional connection with our audience. So there's this phenomenon in psychology called the backfire effect. Great examples that you brought up around how we're pitching every day, even with my children, with my podcast, etc. Because when we try to convince someone of something, we usually use logical arguments, and they often end as real arguments as well. You don't want to do this. Well, here's me telling you why you should want to do this. Why aren't I changing your mind? And in fact, the backfire effect says that the more I try and persuade you of something in that way that you don't agree with, the more you will push back against me. And I mean, kids are a fantastic example of this.
Yes. But also, humans are just big kids, right?
Of course.
And it is true in the work environment just as much.
Absolutely. It's true in every environment. And it's a subconscious bias that we can short circuit, we can overcome by creating an emotional connection.
Yeah.
Because if I create an emotional connection with you, then you will like me more.
Yeah.
And you will want to work with me. You will be more open to my suggestions. I will hit your heart and create that emotional bond.
Right.
And if we can do this, then we are in the exact position for persuasion. So if we think just in a business pitch context, once I've made an emotional connection with you,
Right.
you'll be thinking, I like this guy. My heart's now telling me that I do want to work with him. I need to now ask him for some more information, some evidence to back up what he's saying so that I don't have this thing called cognitive dissonance where my heart and my mind don't necessarily agree with each other. So a pitch isn't about not giving information, but it's the order of it that's absolutely essential. Make the emotional connection first and then give the information part and the evidence second.
So essentially, you want to win someone over before you ever get started in talking to them about what you're trying to win them over to.
Exactly that.
Okay.
Exactly that.
So how do you do that? Do you have a fast and quick formula for making me like you?
Well, there's a number of ways of doing it. One of them is to create an experience, like the British Rail experience. But the other way of doing this is storytelling. And stories are brilliant because stories are memorable.
Mm-hmm.
You'll remember stories far more than you'll remember information. But they also hold the key to this emotional connection because emotions are contagious. We have these things called mirror neurons, which means that if I feel sad and openly exhibit that, you will feel sad too.
Yeah.
And if I look happy and start laughing, you will feel happy and start laughing as well. So when we tell a story, if we tell a true story from our heart about an experience that we've had, we tend to relive those emotions naturally anyway. And if we allow ourselves to be vulnerable and really relive those emotions, then our audience will be reliving and feeling those emotions with us too. And that is an instant emotional connection. And if we think about, well, what is the number one thing I want my audience to take away, to remember? Is it about trust? Is it about being brave and courageous, about being innovative, about safety?
Yeah.
Think of a time in your life where you have firsthand learned that moral and tell that story. And the audience will be thinking, this is a seemingly irrelevant story. However, I'm naturally engaged because I love stories because I'm a human.
Right.
But at the end of it, if you say, and that's how I feel about the technology that we're working with today, then it's a penny drop moment in your audience's mind. They go, oh, that's why you told the story. And that's such a brilliant way of putting it into words because I'm going to remember that lesson that you've just told me.
You know, so many members of our listening community are folks who are in business on their own. Either they're newly in business on their own and trying to figure it out, or maybe they're longtime consultants. And selling is a big part of what they need to do in order to fill the funnel and have the important work. And it can be a real time suck because you just can't run it everything. How do you know which are the right pitches to go for? And how do you figure out what's a waste of your time versus where, you are the underdog, but you have a shot and you should go for it?
So there's a whole qualification process that everyone should go through. We often have opportunities land on our plate, for example, that we weren't expecting. And we think, we might have just hit the big time. Someone's given us a lottery ticket out of nowhere.
Sure.
That's a red flag. If you don't know it's coming, then you're probably not someone that they are necessarily seriously considering.
Right.
The other thing to think about is, do you have a relationship already with the audience? And if not, are they willing to give you the time to meet, preferably face-to-face, and ask questions and get to know them before the pitch? If the answer is no, that's another red flag. And then you've got to think, are they the right size business for me? If I'm a solo entrepreneur and I'm making, I don't know, $100K a year in the first year of my business, and $1 billion company approaches me for $2 million of services, you think they either don't know enough about me, or again, I'm just another name there. That's another red flag. Can they afford you is the other way around to that equation. If we all have annual revenues. If someone, which we can look up a lot of the times, if a company can obviously not afford the level of services you offer, then that's another red flag. So in my book, I've got 12 qualification questions.
Yeah.
6 of them are questions that we should ask ourselves about the audience, and 6 of them are questions that we should ask ourselves about whether we are ready and whether this is the right work for us.
Just jumping in here to call out this qualification exercise that Danny mentions. Pitches done well take a lot of work, and one of the most important moments in a pitch is deciding whether you're going to do it at all. When you treat pitching like a numbers game, you end up chasing everything and winning very little. This is how you figure out what not to do. Danny's qualification exercise is built around 12 questions. 6 are about the audience. Do they actually need what you offer? Do they have the authority, the budget, the appetite to act? The other 6 are about you. Are you ready for this work? Does it align with what you're building? Is it the right use of your time right now? This exercise helps you choose the opportunities where real connection is actually possible.
Because a big problem is that some people see pitching as a numbers game.
Yeah.
They will chase any opportunity, and they will not give enough time to any of those opportunities because of it.
Right.
And if you're not winning the work, then it's an absolutely pointless pursuit and a waste of your time.
Okay, so this gets to actually the thing that I'm most curious about. As I try to understand what you're conveying, I think, well, gosh, it sounds so fun, but so time-consuming that I don't want to be putting this time against anything that I don't have a strong likelihood of winning.
Absolutely.
I want to be ambitious enough to go for broke, but I want to make sure I'm going in the right direction.
Yeah.
I grew up in a world that rewarded scale. Go for more, do more, work harder, spend more time on this. And the interesting moment that we're in right now is a switch on that. With AI making infinite scale in any direction possible, all value goes to making the right decisions in the right moments with the right people and the right stakeholders. And it's a lot easier to get lost on the way to that. It's a lot easier to spend your cycles on things that aren't going to pay you dividends. And in light of that, I want to make sure that I'm crafting these beautiful pitches for exactly the right audience. And you answered in part, but that's the piece that I'm really interested in getting right.
Why are you starting a company? What do you actually want to achieve? Because to your point, there are 1,000 things on your to-do list. And you feel like if I do all of them, then my company might succeed. But you can't ever do all of them, even with AI. So figure out what are the things that you are putting your time into that will actually move the needle to where you want to get to what you desire in your heart. And potentially that's purely financial. Well, we can still relate the things we do to what's going to have the best financial reward. But I think beyond that, we all need to think about what is our mission, the thing that we love that's going to fulfill us in work, not just fulfill our bank accounts.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's that. And I think getting to the filter of what matters to me, it's both the place to start and the place where we sometimes get lost when we get off course, right?
Yeah.
You say about your own path that sales wasn't where you saw yourself. You had a very eclectic path, actually. What has it shown you about who can be a salesperson, who the best salespeople are?
Oh, anybody can be a salesperson. That's what it's taught me first off. But it's also taught me that the perception of sales that most people have is way off.
Yeah.
It's way off. I think that people look at salespeople, forget the manipulative bit. I think that's less pertinent these days. That was a thought I had many years ago. But they look at the confident people. They say, I can't be in sales. That person is there and just talks and it all just sounds great and they're confident in their body language and in the volume of their voice, and it's just not me. I'm an introvert.
Yeah.
And, this is something that Daniel Pink talks about a lot. The best salespeople aren't extroverts. They're not necessarily the most introverted people either, but they are ambiverts. They are somewhere in the middle, which, good news, is most of us. I'm certainly an ambivert. I can turn it on sometimes when I need to, but I'm quite introverted.
Right.
But this emotional connection thing I was talking about, am I going to be more connected to a bold, brash, what I consider salesperson, or am I going to be more connected to someone who is less confident, but more genuine and more honest? And so, some of the greatest speeches and presentations of all time have been done by people who are openly nervous and mess up. And that only serves to warm the audience to them.
Right.
And if you are willing to be vulnerable and tell a true story from your heart,
Right.
then it matters not a jot whether you are this confident performer that people think you need to be.
Well, the performance piece is interesting, right? Because there's this expectation that a good salesperson is a good performer.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem with performers is that we sometimes sense they're performing and therefore they don't feel authentic and they don't feel genuine.
Absolutely that. Absolutely that. I think that performing is the key word there. We're not there to perform.
Yeah.
We're there to genuinely tell our audience why we think our idea is great for them.
Yeah.
So if our audience is the hero and we genuinely believe we can help them, that's the only message that we need to get across. A lot of businesses focus on themselves.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, most businesses do, in a pitch. And I have heard a lot of pitches. And it normally starts with a story that says, "Lovely to meet you. Let me tell you about how great our product is. Let me tell you about how great we are. In fact, let me tell you about some statistics, all of the certifications, where we are in the Gartner quadrant." And we can go on for hours. And our audience is thinking, are you going to talk about me at any point? And so, I've got a framework. I call it the story coaster. Part of the reason it's the story coaster is because what we must do is contrast between emotions about the problems we face versus a glorious vision of the future. It's the sort of stuff that Nancy Duarte talks about with her spark lines. But the big focus has to be on the audience. So I always start a pitch with the audience's situation, why they should act now. Let me tell you all about why I think you've got problems and challenges that are holding you back. And let me talk about that in multiple facets: financially, customer service, technology, data, whatever it is, so that you don't just have a reason to act, but you've got a reason to act now. And then I contrast to, but imagine a world, a glorious vision of the future. And I paint a picture of their transformed world, the thing that they most desire.
Yeah.
But then we contrast again and we say, but it's not going to be easy to get there. You are going to face challenges and obstacles along the way. And then we contrast again and we say, but. So we're the mentor in this. We are not the hero. Our audience is the hero. We say, but we have the big idea. This is how our idea, we think, can take you from where you are today and get you to that vision of the future and overcome all of those challenges. So the entire time we get to our solution, but we've only been talking about helping them.
Yeah. Does this work in every situation?
I use this framework in every pitch situation. I would argue that you could even use it to get your son to brush his teeth.
You haven't met my son.
Well, I got 3 of my own.
But what I love about this framework is that it is just that it is a framework. You can fill out the quadrants to get yourself to a starting place.
Yes, it's 6 steps in the model. The 5th one is we go down again and we say, but we're not just going to do this to you. Our solution isn't one that you can just take and then carry on your everyday life. We're going on a transformation and we've got to be in it together. So I'm going to be honest. Here are the things that are dependent on you for your own success.
Yeah.
And then the final box is, and here's why we think we're the only company in the world that can do this for you. And this is where we bring in those rational facts, figures, evidence at the end of the emotional journey to say, we've not just told you the journey you should go on. We are the only people who can do this for you. And here's why.
So how much of being good at this requires you to be able to read people emotionally in the moment and respond to where they're at?
Reading other human beings is a skill that I think most people can learn. It's an empathy skill, but it takes practice. And if you're not in those situations, if you're on your own as a sole entrepreneur working from home most of the time and not interacting with humans, it's not necessarily straightforward. But I still think that anyone can do this, and that is to pause at every moment in that story and say, what do you think about that? Have I got those problems right? Can you tell me more about it? And always be in that feedback listening loop that we spoke about earlier. And if we have got something wrong, we can pivot by listening to what our audience actually wants to say.
So I love that so much, because when you can coax your audience to become participants, to speak, indeed, in a way, to sell the idea to themselves, that's when you know you're winning, right?
Yes. And it also does another thing, which is strengthen that emotional connection. So I think it was Dale Carnegie who said, to be interesting, be interested.
Yeah.
So if you and I have a conversation and I am predominantly asking you questions about yourself, you will most likely walk away and think, Danny was a brilliant conversationalist.
I like him so much.
Yeah.
I wonder why.
Right. People love to talk about themselves, so we give them that opportunity.
You know, I love that you say that, because I came up as a magazine journalist writing long-form profiles of important business people. And that would mean that my job would be to descend into your life for a series of weeks.
Yeah.
Maybe go to dinner with your family, meet all the people you worked with, ask you everything I could think of about how you had come up and how you had made your way in life. And inevitably, I finished those stories and I thought the equivalent of, Danny is so interesting. And I went home and I wrote a good story about them. And inevitably, the other person finished up and said, Jessi is my new best friend.
Right. That is just about the best example of this that I have ever heard.
Yeah.
Because did they know anything about you at the end of it? Probably very little.
Sure.
But you were an ear that allowed them to talk about things that probably no one normally asks them about. And that is so transferable to these business pitches.
No, I have to say, it leads me back to the deep insight here that pitching is connecting, right? And connecting is often something you get to by being deeply interested in someone else and being curious about them.
Yeah.
And asking, taking the time to really inquire at every step and to be willing in the moment to have your mind changed.
Yes, absolutely.
Right?
I mean, we spoke before we started recording about how the best podcasts really are a discussion.
Sure.
And the best pitches really are a discussion as well. And sometimes we get given an hour slot or a 90-minute slot and we think, right, how many PowerPoint slides do we need to fill this? Audiences love it in an hour when we present for 10 minutes. And we ask them questions and turn it into a discussion. And we even finish early. There's been a number of times where I've been working on really important big pitches in business. Right. And the team and I have got tangled up in information and slides. And it's been a couple of times where we've said, you know what? Just no slides. Let's get that headache out of the way. Let's go into the room and let's ask the audience. There are 1,000 things that we could have presented to you today. What is the number one thing that you want to know about? What is your biggest concern? Because we're smart people and the listeners of this podcast are smart people and business owners. They've got the answers.
Sure.
We don't need to plan it because we don't know the answers. So if you can just be confident and vulnerable enough to be in a room and say, just ask me whatever you want because I think I can help you, but I'd like to know what your biggest challenges and concerns are. And they're the areas that I'll use our time with today. That's highly, highly valuable.
Well, it sounds like being vulnerable in the moment, but you absolutely must pair that with the preparation beforehand so that
Yes.
when you're sitting in there and they ask those questions, they're not asking you anything that you haven't figured out how to pregame for, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And if you're going down that route, the best preparation you can do is practice that.
Yeah.
And this is where AI can help, because sometimes, let's say you and I are on a team together and I say, ask me some really hard questions. Imagine you're the client. Ask me some really hard questions. You'll be asking all the questions that we've just been working on in this little bubble of our mind that this is probably the things that will get asked. If I ask ChatGPT instead and outline what I'm doing and say, ask me the 10 toughest questions that you possibly could from the world's most difficult client, and practice that way.
Yeah.
And we can even do this on the voice mode on these AI things now and really run ourselves through. That will help us get so prepared and so confident, which in turn really eases those nerves and anxiety that everybody inevitably goes through as well. Because on the day, guaranteed, the audience will not ask those really, really tough questions anyway, but you know that you're ready for them if they do.
That was Danny Fontaine, author of the book Pitch. I hope you check it out. And there are a few things that I know that I'm going to take away from this conversation. First of all, the best pitches start with the shared understanding. You know, back to that story at the top, Peter Marsh didn't tell British Rail what their problem was. He made them feel it. And once they felt it, they were ready to listen to him. You know, too often we just jump too soon to explaining our ideas before we've really made someone else feel seen. That's the big opportunity, right? And that also gets to the second thing that I'm taking away. Pitching is about connecting. The people we trust aren't the slickest. They're not the loudest. They're the ones who are genuinely interested in us. So the best pitch, it's often just a real conversation. One in which you're willing to listen long enough to let the other person recognize themselves in the story that you're telling. And finally, and this one is way more important than you think it is, order matters in a pitch. We tend to lead with data, credentials, logic. Danny reminds us that persuasion only works in the opposite direction. First, you gotta win someone over. Then you give them the information that they need to justify what, by then, they already feel. That is how you win. I'm Jessi Hempel, and this is Hello Monday. Thanks for joining us in the studio. I'll see you right back here next week. Hello Monday is a production of LinkedIn News. The show is produced by Ava Ahmadbegi and Adam Yates. Sarah Storm is our senior producer. Sound design and engineering by Asaf Gidron. The show is mixed by Tim Bolin. Our theme music was composed just for us by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. Michaela Greer is a friend of the show forever, as is Victoria Taylor. Kyle Ranson-Walsh is editor-at-large of editorial graphics. Dave Pond is head of production and creative operations. Courtney Coop is head of original programming. Dan Roth is the editor-in-chief of LinkedIn. I'm Jessi Hempel. This is Hello Monday. See you next week.